Middy Streeter is a longtime member of City Congregation and an English instructor at Hudson Community College. He is the author of Solving the Solar Enigma, the story of the scientists behind the discovery of the sun's energy source, published by Dimension Engineering Press in 2003. He's also written for Destination Vietnam, the Circus Report, and the Waterbury Republican American. So what an eclectic bunch of publications, Middy. So without further ado, I'm turning the mic over to Middy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sama. Now that I think of it, I'd say a slightly better way of putting it is that he is the author of the widely unread book, Solving the Solar Enigma. But anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk to all of you about something that I love to talk about. So let's get started. Viewing any subject through the lens of a particular group of people, selected strictly because of the circumstances of their birth, is certainly not the best strategy for seeking any kind of deep understanding. But with that said, I hope you'll find at least some of what I have to say informative regarding a few of the many extraordinary astronomers who also happen to be Jewish. As far as famous astronomers go, Galileo Galilei is still at the top of the heap, even after the 4 centuries that have passed since his death, and for good reason. His work led to a quantum leap in our knowledge of the heavens. But that's all I'm going to say about him, because as we all know, he wasn't Jewish, and he probably wasn't all that well known by the general public during his lifetime, except for maybe in the tabloids during his big trial for heresy. The first astronomer to achieve worldwide public acclaim was the British astronomer William Herschel, and he was Jewish. Actually, though, only his father was Jewish, and he converted to Lutheranism. And to add insult to injury, his son John, who also became a notable astronomer, was buried in that bastion of the Anglican Church, Westminster Abbey. Nevertheless, I say this is not the time to nitpick. So, when William Herschel began his professional life, it was for his very considerable musical talent that he had the most potential for fame. He was born in 1738 in the Hanover region of what would later become Germany. His father was an oboist with the military band attached to the Hanoverian Guards, and William followed in his footsteps by becoming a musician in that unit as well. When he was 19, however, his father sent him to England to avoid the aftermath of the defeat of the Hanoverian Guards in the Battle of Hastenbeck. One advantage that Herschel had was that he was a multi-instrumentalist. In addition to the oboe, he played the violin, harpsichord, and organ. He worked his way up the English musical ladder, doing stints as a violinist with the Newcastle Orchestra, and later as the leader of the Durham Militia Band. And in 1776, he was hired as the organist for the Octagon Chapel in the town of Bath. Significantly, Herschel was also interested in the technical side of music, which led him to read Robert Smith's book, Harmonics, or the Philosophy of Musical Sounds. He then decided to read another of Smith's works, A Complete System of Optics, and that book happened to have a section on telescopes. He then decided to build a telescope for himself, and the one he chose to make was a reflector telescope. This type of telescope was invented by Isaac Newton and uses a concave mirror instead of a series of lenses like the refracting telescopes that Galileo used. Not satisfied with the quality of the mirrors that were available at that time, Herschel studied lens grinding with a local artisan and constructed a telescope with a 7-inch mirror, the biggest in the country at that time. It's not all that clear what came first, his interest in gadgets or his interest in astronomy, but in any event, he certainly put his new gizmo to good use, because he then began to methodically record the position of every celestial object he could find. In 1781, after 8 years of doing this laborious work over hundreds of chilly nights in the backyard of his house in Bath, he noticed something moving in an unusual way that he at first thought might be a comet. It turned out to be a planet. He wanted to name it Georgium Sidus, Latin for George's star, in honor of King George III. But even though there were probably lots of British astronomers who relished the thought of how annoyed their counterparts in the recently founded United States of America would be at the choice of that name, cooler heads prevailed, and it was eventually named Uranus after the Greek god of the sky. It was the first planet discovered since antiquity, and it made Herschel famous almost overnight. The next year, the Royal Society, the most prestigious science organization of that time, awarded him their Copley Medal, which was the Nobel Prize of its day. It remains a mystery as to why George III didn't get around to knighting Herschel until 1816, a full 25 years after his discovery of Uranus. But my suspicion is that it was because he didn't push hard enough for the Georgium Sidus name. In any event, the only thing I might add is that William Herschel is certainly a lesson to all those parents out there who think their children will never amount to anything if all they do is sit around playing music or tinkering with things. Besides being a brilliant astronomer, William Herschel was also a really good guy. And the reason I say that is that he helped out his younger sister, Caroline, when she most needed help. Unfortunately, for her, only 2 of the 10 children in the Herschel family were girls. And her sister, who was 16 years older than her, married when Caroline was 5 and old enough to start doing housework. Her mother then began having designs on keeping her as a permanent maid and resisted her efforts to get even a minimal education. Fortunately, in 1772, when she was 22, William rescued her from the clutches of Mama by bringing her to England. Like her brother, Caroline had a remarkable ability to apply herself to whatever task she set before her. One thing she wanted to do was learn to sing. And soon after arriving in Bath, she started taking lessons. In only a couple of years, she was singing in professional choral groups. When William turned to astronomy, Caroline began working closely with him and continued to do so for the rest of their lives together. In the course of all those nights of helping him record his celestial observations, Caroline developed an extensive knowledge of astronomy herself, and whenever she could, she did her own observing. On February 26, 1783, she made her first discovery, a nebula that was not included in any of the star catalogs available at that time. It is now known as Messier 110 and is actually a small galaxy. 3 years later, on August 1st, 1786, she spotted something that also resembled a nebula, except that it was round, and she correctly identified it as a comet. Caroline went on to discover 7 more comets, and 5 of them were documented in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. She also compiled an update of the Flamsteed star catalog that contained more than 550 stars that had not been previously included. To give you an idea of just how famous William Herschel was, here's a print that was made of him at home polishing a mirror for one of his telescopes. And that's Caroline serving him tea. How British is that? In 1787, George III made William his court astronomer and hired Caroline as his assistant. Her appointment made her the first woman to work as a professional astronomer. I think we can say that Caroline and William were the closest thing to the Wright brothers that the field of astronomy has ever had. Anyway, as I was saying, the Herschel siblings' fame came as a result of their consummate skills in tracking the movements of celestial bodies. And 200 years later, Vera Rubin made her name as an astronomer through her ability in that area as well, except that what she was following were galaxies. Her father was born in Vilnius, Lithuania, then part of Poland. Changed his name from Pesach Kobchevsky to Philip Cooper. Her mother was descended from Jews from the Bessarabian region of Eastern Europe. For her master's thesis at Cornell in 1951, Rubin studied the rotational motions of 108 galaxies and found similarities that no one before her had detected. She continued to do this research for the next 3 decades. While studying the rotation of the Andromeda galaxy, the closest spiral galaxy to our home galaxy, the Milky Way, she saw something surprising. When she calculated the velocities of its stars, she discovered that they were all moving at roughly the same speed. She was expecting the stars near the center to be moving more rapidly than the more distant stars. The most familiar example of this situation is our own solar system, with the inner planets taking much less time to orbit the sun than the distant ones. When Rubin spotted this uniformity in the speeds of the stars in the galaxies, she began to consider the possibility that there was a halo of unseen matter exerting a gravitational pull on the outer stars and thereby accelerating their motion. She conservatively estimated that almost half of all the matter in Andromeda was in this form, a form that mysteriously emitted no light whatsoever. Rubin published her results in 1970. Over the next 10 years, she studied some 200 more galaxies and found that the velocities of their stars indicated the presence of invisible matter around every one of them as well. She published her results in 1980 in the Astrophysical Journal in a landmark paper with a long title, the first part of which is Rotational Properties of 21 SC Galaxies with a Large Range of Luminosities and Radii. The rest of the title is on the screen there. With the release of this paper, the existence of what has come to be known as dark matter was conclusively established. The current estimate is that only 15% of the matter in the universe is in the form of atoms. The rest is dark matter. Unfortunately, no one is in the least bit certain as to what dark matter consists of. The one thing that can be said, though, is that Rubin succeeded in discovering the most abundant material in the universe. Not surprisingly, she received many awards for her accomplishments, one of the most prestigious being the Gold Medal of the Royal Astronomical Society. She was only the second female recipient and the first woman to be given it since the year 1828. You can now probably guess that her lone female predecessor was none other than Caroline Herschel. Like Vera Rubin, Saul Perlmutter is an astronomer who can trace part of his roots to Bessarabia. His maternal grandfather was a Yiddish teacher who emigrated to Canada from the Bessarabian town of Floresti. He and Adam Rees, who is also Jewish, are experts on supernovas. And while making some observations in 1998, they noticed something unusual. The more distant ones weren't as bright as they were expected to be, according to the standard method of measuring their distances. Their light spectra indicated that their velocities, and therefore their distances from us, were not as great as their dimness indicated. Perlmutter, working at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and Rees, working separately with Brian Schmidt at Australian National University, then concluded that there had to be more energy pushing these stars outward than was previously thought. A lot more energy, in fact. They calculated that this energy, now known as dark energy, comprises almost 3/4 of all the mass energy in the universe. They had thus discovered the most abundant entity in the universe. All three were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011. Just as Vera Rubin had done before them, Saul Perlmutter and Adam Rees dramatically increased our knowledge of the makeup of the universe. Just as is the case with dark matter, almost nothing is known about the nature of dark energy. As Adam Rees put it, we're really just the frosting on a cake, and we don't know what's inside the cake. One more thing about Saul Perlmutter. He was raised as a humanist Jew. Until quite recently, his parents were members of the Society for Humanist Judaism congregation in Sarasota, Florida. Another Jewish astronomer who certainly deserves to be on the famous list is Carl Sagan, a Brooklyn native whose father came from Kamyanetsky Podilsky, a city in the western part of Ukraine. He specialized in the solar system, and his research was central to the first accurate determination of the temperature of the surface of Venus. He also studied Jupiter's clouds, the seasonal changes on Mars, and the production of amino acids from basic chemicals by radiation to gain a better understanding of the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Sagan is best known, of course, for having made astronomy more accessible to the general public through his insightful writings and compelling television documentaries. And he also has a connection to humanistic Judaism in that his daughter, Sasha, was featured in the fall 2019 issue of Humanistic Judaism magazine in connection with a book she wrote about being Jewish in the 21st century. I'd like to bring things to a close by showing you another photograph of Vera Rubin. The observatory that she and her colleagues were working in was the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, where she did some of her most important research in the course of her discovery of dark matter. This observatory has been in operation since 1894, when it was built by Percival Lowell. He was particularly interested in the planet Mars, and through his extensive observations, he became a leading authority on it. He lectured widely, and beginning in 1895, he also wrote several books for the general public, some of them becoming bestsellers. Through his work, Lowell ushered in a new wave of interest in astronomy at the beginning of the 20th century. He was also my great-grandmother's older brother, and although Uncle Percy, as we descendants fondly call him, did not happen to be Jewish, I am extremely proud to say that he was the Carl Sagan of his day. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share my enthusiasm about these people who contributed so much to our understanding of the world. And I would also like to sincerely thank Shirley Rands, Susan Ryan, and Ray Carney for their help in making this presentation happen. And I would also like to thank Peter Moniz for his very insightful advice in helping me write this talk. If after all this, you're still interested in noteworthy Jewish astronomers, you might want to check out the TCC website, where you'll find an extended version of this talk, along with information on 3 bonus Jewish astronomers.